Welcome to The Screen Queen, the show where I'll be talking about your favorite show or your favorite movie. You'll just have to find out what you're about to know. This is your Screen Queen, your host, Samantha Parrish. Hello there and welcome to the show. My name is Samantha Parrish and I may not be a Scream Queen, but I am indeed a Screen Queen. I am very excited for this episode because this is the grand premiere of the Halloween series on The Screen Queen. I love my fair share of horror movies. I love to talk about them. I love to dissect them. I love to get down to the grit of the gore. And now I get a whole month to talk about horror movies, horror TV shows, Halloween specials, anything that I can think of. You might find your favorite scary movie on this show. You don't really know what I have in my suggestion box, and I'll admit even I forgot what I put in my suggestion box, so it's going to be an experience for all of us. Starting off the show is a movie that is literally marketed as the most fun you'll ever have being scared. Creepshow really is the most fun I've ever had being scared. I've seen this movie advertised in many different horror outlets. The first time I saw a snippet of it was on the documentary Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue, where Creepshow was used to showcase the change in the horror genre in the 1980s. And I had no idea the clip they showed was Stephen King's acting debut. Later on, I would see certain top 10 lists for horror movies, and Creepshow always came up as number one. After seeing all this critical acclaim where everything kept making top spot, that was enough intrigue for me to find out what Creepshow was all about. The information that I gathered about Creepshow was very interesting, that this was a horror story that was unlike anything ever made, because it really was unlike anything ever made. This is a movie entirely stylized like a comic book. This isn't just a horror movie that has 5 scary stories. This was a movie that has such artistically pleasing elements by utilizing bright blue and bright red colors to signify the chill or the violence that's about to happen. It's a movie that you can watch for the sole purpose of being scared, or appreciate the fact that it's artistically pleasing for how they went out of their way to make this look like a comic book. Normally that would come off pretty cheesy by seeing a bright red light, but because the sole purpose of the story is to look like a comic book, it 100% feels accurate to the atmosphere, and you feel the chill and you feel the fear. Everything about this movie is amazing. The cast, the colors, the fact that it's stylized like a comic book. But when I was watching Creepshow in preparation for this episode, there's a few more things I found to appreciate about Creepshow, and I get to talk all about it in this episode. If you do not know what Creepshow is, if you've never heard of that movie a day in your life, if you're not really too big into horror movies, I can go ahead and give a synopsis, because I don't want anyone to feel like they're in the dark when they listen to this episode, and I'm going to go ahead and save you the trip from having to go to Wikipedia. I got the work done for you, don't worry, babe. Creepshow is a film that came out in 1982, and it is directed by George A. Romero. Now, I gotta talk about that guy for a minute, because he is actually a very important figure in the production of Creepshow. This is the man that is the reason why we have zombie movies. He directed Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead. Anything with the word dead in the title pretty much is what he helmed. He was a director that did not go to college to be a director. He did whatever he could on a tiny budget, and it worked, and he made horror history. And now here he is with Stephen King, who is the screenwriter for Creepshow. So you have two amazing people in horror coming together. It's like Godzilla and King Kong coming together. And it's amazing. That's a high praise, but knowing the fact that you have two of the biggest people in the horror genre, I have nothing to worry about for this movie. I know I'm going to watch gold. With Stephen King at the helm, he delivered 5 stories he gave us the first story called Father's Day, which I feel has a little bit of a Romero influence, which I'll get to that part when we get there. The second story called The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verill, which is, like I mentioned, Stephen King's acting debut. And the third story, which is one of my favorites, Something to Tide You Over. The fourth story called The Crate, my other favorite story. And finally, They're Creeping Up on You. All these are just, they're gold. But on top of having these 5 amazing stories, your introduction to Creepshow is through the person who's reading the comic. Our introduction to Creepshow is a abusive father scolding his son for liking all these horror comics, and the very comic that he's holding is a copy of Creepshow. And the father and the son get into an argument over their differences in life because 80s, I guess, you just had to have that introduction, and things get really dark when the father slaps his son in the face and says that he's going to throw the comic away. And after the father does his basking that, oh, I solved everything, everything's okay because I'm the man of the house, the son is upstairs basically plotting his revenge. And in the window, he sees the image from the Creepshow comic, which is the spirit demon thing. I honestly don't even know what it is, but it is the mascot for the Creepshow comic. And through that mascot, then everything turns animated, and we get our opening sequence of who stars in the movie. And even though it's kind of a tough beginning having that abuse, there's a seamless transition as it goes from live action to puppetry to animation, which is kind of a nice little tie-in together. You don't really see too many animated horror sequences. And you don't really oftentimes see a lot of animation for a horror movie unless it was something like Beetlejuice or Courage the Cowardly Dog. I can't think on top of my head anything else that would have animation serving as a addition to presenting a horror film. But what makes the opening have a interesting tie-in is the fact that the young boy is played by Stephen King's son. That is a young Joe King on the screen, which is kind of nice knowing that Stephen King got to bring his son to work, albeit that's not a very good role for his son to have. You gotta give props to Joe King. He really acted the hell out of the role of a child that is disheartened with his father and is gonna be playing some skeevy, sketchy shit. It's like, oh, the family legacy just keeps going, which is ironic considering Joe King eventually does become a horror author just like his father. So in a way, you're kind of looking at the beginning of what would be Joe King's career in horror. I'm not gonna lie, besides the fact that this was known as one of the best horror films of the 80s, already had me sold, but I already knew that Ted Danson and Leslie Nielsen were in this movie, and that was another reason I wanted to watch it, was to see how 2 people I wouldn't peg to be in a horror film were in a horror film together. And then I saw the rest of the cast list, and I couldn't believe who they got. That Hal Holbrook appeared in the film, and Ed Harris was in the film as well. Adrienne Barbeau. There are many people that were already prominent in acting, or they were just getting up there in the acting business. So to see them all come together, it's kind of like a nice mishmash. It doesn't seem out of place. It all just seems perfect. And then I saw their acting come together, and I'm like, great. What's a word more than perfect? There's more that I'm going to say about the cast later, but I'm going to wait and hold off and give you those tidbits as I talk about the rest of the stories. Now, before I actually get into the stories, I do have to say that there are going to be some minor spoilers, but I am not going to deprive the major shock plot twist for you. I could not do that for you. I would quit immediately than to deprive the experience of someone being able to watch Creepshow, because I'm not one of those people that pushes the experience on someone, but if you're open to wanting to actually see that, I won't deprive you of that experience. I can't do it. So with that said, here is the first story of Creepshow. Creepshow's first story starts out with Father's Day. Father's Day follows a family getting together for a nice meal, and naturally at family gatherings, you gotta talk shit about your family. It just has to happen. Father's Day is very morbid just from the get-go. The way this family reacts to tragic news, they treat it the same way like reading a grocery list. It's like, oh, well, yeah, we found out that our grandfather got murdered by our great aunt, so that's a thing. So can you pass me the hors d'oeuvres? That's the tone of that begins the story of how they explain what happened to the great patriarch in their family, who was not really great at all as the story progresses. But you do find out that, you gotta put the father in Father's Day, and the man does come back from the grave. Honestly, even though Father's Day is not really the story that I really fell in love with, I do love the heavy amounts of drama that's put in here. When you watch a horror story, I look for the drama. I like to see how I can be able to invest into these people that are about to have the worst day of their life. The acting is absolutely superb. I love the character of Aunt Bedelia with how tragic she is, that you do understand why she did what she had to do. And honestly, despite the fact that it's a very tragic story in the beginning, it does get very fun. You will not be disappointed with Father's Day. In this particular story, I kind of feel that George A. Romero had to sprinkle in a little bit of his horror on there. The reason I say that is because it's centered around the idea that the dad is about to reenact the Thriller. And when George A. Romero does a zombie reveal, he goes all the way. He holds nothing back. He gets all the grit and the grime going. There was no way to introduce Creepshow without having his introduction to show a whole new generation in the 80s what he can do. That's just my personal take on it. Every time I watch Creepshow, there's just something that I appreciate more than the last time I watched the movie. And if it wasn't for Father's Day, then there really would not be a good way to introduce what people are going to be in for the rest of the movie. That they're going to get that same grit and grime and terror while also having fun. Because really, if it wasn't for that, it's a hell of an introduction to the next 4 stories. And the next story that I'll be discussing is The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verill. Now, there's a little side story that I have to give about this story. Because I mentioned Stephen King had his son playing a role in the movie, there was a point during the time in the film that they went off to McDonald's to go get a burger. And the cashier turned around, "Hi, welcome to McDonald's," and she gasped. Joe King still had the bruise makeup on from the scene he did in the prologue. So this cashier is terrified and thinking, what's going on right now? I got Stephen King in front of me, and his child has a bruise. And Stephen King had completely forgot, so he had to explain to the cashier, "Oh, it's for a movie. It's okay. I'm sorry. I completely forgot." It's one of those things that it's not good, but it was just an honest mistake. But I'm pretty sure that cashier was like, I don't know, they didn't cover this in the McDonald's protocol about what happens when The Shining is about to be reenacted. That poor employee. They were not expecting that. But I have to applaud the fact that Stephen King took it upon himself to insert himself into the story as an actor to bring the story to life. There's something to be said about a writer and how they know how a character needs to be portrayed. I feel that as a writer myself, where there are mannerisms and tones that only I know how the character is supposed to act. So to see Stephen King play his own character, Jordy Verill, to exactly portray the way Jordy Verill is. We wouldn't really know who Jordy Verill is, only Stephen King can tell us, and who better than himself. And it is really interesting to see Stephen King become an actor. He is a remarkable actor whenever he gets involved in the productions of his own series. It kind of gives me the hope one day that I'll be able to do the same as well for my series, that I can go and play my characters. Sometimes you do what you just got to do when you know what it's supposed to be and the way it's supposed to come out. It's like what Sebastian said in The Little Mermaid, like, if you got to do something right, you got to do it yourself. And dang, I'm glad Stephen King did this role, because it is fantastic. He gives such a great performance as this dim-witted farmer. And it's funny because he's a terrifying man. He's known for terrifying stories, and yet he has this, like, perfect, like, Vermont accent, and he gives these wild facial expressions that doesn't feel like he's trying too hard. He's just having fun with this character, and also bringing him to life for his foolishness, that his foolishness is about to bite him in the ass. The story that follows the lonesome death of Jordy Verill is a meteor crashes onto his land, and he goes over to investigate, and he's thinking, ooh, I can make some money off of this rock from outer space. And then he touches the damn thing and it breaks, and he's like, well, crap, great, now I just got a broken meteor with some meteor shit, as the way he would put it. And the stuff from the meteor begins to infect him. And you see over the course of the short story about what this does to him. And it is, I can't reveal what happened in the rest of the lonesome death of Jordy Verill, but I will say this, because I want people to keep this in mind when someone watches this or they rewatch it, is to pay attention to the scene at the very end. This is not really a major spoiler, but it's a very interesting reference. There's a sign that we see where there are arrows indicating to different towns, and one of them is Castle Rock. Now, to those out there that don't know what that is, I'm going to go ahead and explain it anyway so everyone is on the same page. Castle Rock is a common reference in many other Stephen King stories, and it eventually became a TV show on Hulu for 2 seasons. It's a remarkable thing that kind of serves as like a Stephen King anthology story to elaborate more on his other stories or other characters. So to see that The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verill has a placement on the Stephen King cinematic universe is quite interesting. Who knows? We don't know what he's going to come up with. He might end up circling back around to the story, and we might get more about Jordy Verill, or you might have some random character reference Jordy Verill. It would be interesting to see if this character does end up becoming referenced solely because of the way that it is a continuation into the other works of Stephen King that reference his other works, or continue into the world building that he's created to connect all of his horror stories together. I think that's extremely interesting, and I keep forgetting about that really interesting obscure reference. With the opening being Father's Day and the lonesome death of Jordy Verill, it was a wonder what was going to be the next terrifying topper. And it just got better with the next installment of Something to Tide You Over. Something to Tide You Over is one of those love triangle stories, but this might possibly one of the best love triangle stories for how this story carefully balances out revenge and karma at the same time. The story starts out with a man named Harry, played by Ted Danson, as he's going about his day, and then he opens it up, and he's not very happy to see that it's a man named Richard, played by Leslie Nielsen. And they have a little chit-chat about Richard's wife, and he lets Harry know, hey, I know that you're seeing my wife. And Harry has no shame. He's like, you didn't love her. I love her. We were going to tell you about it, and you don't have to worry about anything. I'll take care of her. And then Richard's like, well, I already took care of her. And that is where your scary story comes in. What happened to Rebecca? Now, I have to say that this segment right here is the reason I watched Creepshow. I saw clips of this specific story segment, and I kept looking at it like, is that Leslie Nielsen and Ted Danson? And then, sure enough, when their names popped up in the opening credits, like, okay, well, what's it going to be like to watch them? And from the information I gathered before I watched the movie, there was a lot of praise towards Leslie Nielsen. Now, I gotta talk about this actor for a moment. I don't know if the listeners out there know who Leslie Nielsen is. Leslie Nielsen has a very interesting background in his career. When he first started out as an actor, he did movies in the drama department. And then it wasn't until the 1980s that he decided to do a change in his career and try his hand at comedy. And the man is hysterical. He did the Airplane series, he was in the Naked Gun franchise, and he also had a couple of roles in the Scary Movie franchise. So knowing that he's a comedian, whenever I watch Something to Tide You Over, I don't see the comedian. I see a vile man that went to such extreme lengths to get back at someone. And then I also have to remind myself that this is the man that has the words, "Let her rip," written on his grave. He plays one of the most underrated villains in cinema history. Not just horror movies. This is a kind of villain that you could see in any kind of movie. Drama, horror, thriller, anything. I wish that Leslie Nielsen played more villains because he was good at it. And I find it ironic when I had to look at the timeline that he played this character right around the beginning of his comedy career. It wasn't until the recent time that I watched it that I had to appreciate it a little bit more, remembering the legacy of his career. But there's also another part that I love that has to do with Something to Tide You Over, and that's Ted Danson. I never thought that I'd ever see Ted Danson in a horror film because Ted Danson, he's so wholesome. That's Sam Malone from Cheers. It's Becker. He does do a good job playing scumwads, as later on in his career he would go on to go play villains, but at that time he was still the charming old scamp that played Sam Malone on Cheers, and in that time frame when he was starting up as an actor, that was the main thing in his career was Cheers. So to have Cheers and Creepshow on his resume, that's quite the interesting mix to add on there. And he does do a very great job in this role. But there was also something that Ted Danson struggled with during this segment, and that was making sure that his 5-year-old daughter did not walk in at any of the horrific moments. It just happened to be that it was visitation weekend, and he was going to have her on the set to spend some time with her, but at the same time, he worried about what his daughter was going to find. So he told the cast and crew, like, hey, please make sure that my daughter does not see anything going on here, and everyone tried their best to make sure that Ted Danson's daughter didn't find anything. And in the scene where Ted Danson's character is buried in the sand up into his neck, who comes up on set? His daughter. And just walks up right to him and just goes, "Hi, Daddy." So it's like, he didn't even have to worry that, and she wasn't scarred, she wasn't worried, she thought nothing of it. I find that kind of funny as a parallel, considering the story I mentioned earlier with Stephen King and what happened with his son at McDonald's, and then we have another family story that's involved with Creepshow. This really is a family picture because of the families that are involved with this movie. It is quite funny. Something to Tide You Over is one of the most intense psychological stories, and it is crafted to perfection. I've mentioned how great Leslie Nielsen plays the villain in this segment. And what makes this very powerful is there are snippets of comedy that Leslie Nielsen puts into the tone of the character. And looking at that, that's actually pretty genius. A lot of villains think what they're doing is funny, and they take great pleasure into the misery of others and knowing that others are going to suffer. In a way, having a comedian play a villain and using those skills to elevate the performance and elevate the character, that's just a genius concept. And honestly, when it comes to some certain jump scares, I will admit, I haven't had a jump scare affect me in quite some time, and the moments in this segment really got my gourd. I was thoroughly impressed how they were able to effectively and simply scare the pants out of you for what you don't see coming. Like, this story completely bamboozles you. It has you thinking that you know exactly what's going on, and then does a complete 360 on you, and you're like, oh crap, well, I'm never visiting the beach for a long time. It's fantastic. Now, when I watched Creepshow, I was fully in love with Something to Tide You Over, because that was the reason I watched Creepshow, was for Ted Danson and Leslie Nielsen, and, well, you know, I gotta see why it's a great horror film. But then I watched The Crate, and then everything changed for me. The Crate is like the equivalence of a fine wine. I say that because it has taste and it's aged extremely well. The Crate has a lot of detail to it, but it never came across as being a story that had elements that couldn't be properly explained. But in this short story, they have enough detail into it that you have many parts to this story that makes you intrigued by all of the different parts to it. You're not just following one story, which makes this very intriguing. Most times in short stories, it's kind of a risky gamble because you can't compact too much stuff into what is a short story. But The Crate makes it work. There are several reasons why The Crate is one of my favorite stories. Not just for it being a story in the Creepshow movie, but as a horror story in general. There's such a level of intelligence in this short story. The thing about a short story is that you have to feel like you know what's been going on, even if you don't really know what has been present in the characters' lives. How is that going to be introduced? How are you going to get to know these characters? You know a lot about these characters within the first few seconds of The Crate. It opens up with a couple being introduced to work at the university, and there's a woman who is immediately taking it upon herself to be the welcome wagon to tell this couple if they need anything to let her know. And anytime that they go to say something, she doesn't even let them talk. That does speak a lot for how uncomfortable she makes the atmosphere, and we haven't even seen what the horror part of this horror story is yet. The thing that is a major part of this story is that this woman always wants everyone to call her Billy. And her husband is nearby, and he calls her Wilma, and completely dismisses him and derails him and just says, oh, just call me Billy, everyone else does. She's trying to force everyone to like her. That is a great example of gaslighting and manipulation, if I've ever seen that in a film. And she even goes so far as to make this apparent by telling everyone else that her husband can't do anything without her. It's a majorly embarrassing thing, and like I said, this makes it as a great example of what gaslighting and manipulation and what emotional abuse looks like. You know everything about this character just from the way that she reacts. And then you also know the other characters by their reactions towards her. There are two professors nearby that are not saying anything, but their silence speaks volumes about this scene. While Wilma is talking about things that people could care less about, these two professors share a look that they agree for the fact that they're very uncomfortable. But it's like this look is a silent language of theirs, so you can tell automatically these two professors are best friends. I love the first few seconds that you see these two professors played by Hal Holbrook and Fritz Weaver, just because of the amount of emotions they put into their facial expressions. You can tell a lot by these characters, and you know exactly what the story is going to be like just from their reactions alone. You know exactly what has been going on for the lives of these characters. This is not the first time that it's happened, and it sure as hell ain't the last. It's one of those stories that speaks so much without having to give you the direct details. You could have had the story say like, oh, Billy is an emotionally abusive wife. No, that didn't even have to be said. Just from the way that she says things, you can tell she's an emotionally abusive wife. And these two characters that don't say anything, you know that they've endured this for quite some time, that they have to be uncomfortably comfortable with it. But as the story progresses, there's a lot that keeps you guessing for what's going to happen. The emotional abuse gets worse throughout the story, but there's kind of a funny way they go about it. Emotional abuse is never funny, but the fact that the emotional abuse is taking a toll on Henry, who is one of the professors, you do see how he's handling it. There's a scene that is very interesting and shocking the first time I saw it, where he calls out to his wife and says, "Oh, Wilma!" and then he shoots her in broad daylight. And the first time I saw it, I'm like, well, that was quick. Is this really going on? Is this the kind of story that I'm in for? And then everyone claps, and then it becomes indicated, oh, this is a daydream sequence, because no one claps to a dead body. No one claps to broad daylight murder. In a way, that's morbid, but at the same time, that kind of fits. Especially for the fact that it's a horror story, it does add these certain various layers to it, but it does also give the intrigue that this character is now becoming very unhinged in his marriage to his wife. That we aren't quite sure what's going to be a daydream or if he's actually going to be killing his wife. The way that these scenes play out throughout the duration of the crate, whenever you do see Henry and Wilma together and Henry does something to Wilma, it holds for so long that it keeps you guessing to wonder, is he really killing his wife or is this a daydream? But because it holds it so long and doesn't get cut off, it truly makes you guess. But what is the point of the crate? That's the big question about this story. Later on, as the story progresses, Dexter, the other professor at the gathering, is called to look at a delivery that's come to the university. And they find out that this is definitely a live specimen that has been delivered to the university. And I have to quickly mention the earlier segment, Father's Day, for the utilization of the colors. Father's Day and the crate really does go hand in hand for how they depicted the violence in this story to show the same kind of style as a comic book. These two really do rival each other for how they're able to create a live-action comic book with the angles and the colors and the gore, the facial reactions. It's quite amazing with all the up-close shots that truly makes you feel like you're watching a comic book. This is just... it's an amazing story, but honestly, the story makes me a little bit sad. Hal Holbrook, who played the character Henry, passed away last year, and he was a very good actor, and I have to admit, Hal Holbrook is one of my favorite actors, so to watch this film after his passing, it makes it sentimental for me, but at the same time, it's one of these performances that does make me happy because I love what he brought to the world of cinema. The Crate really is one of the most underrated stories in the entirety of the horror genre, and I wish that it got a little bit more love, knowing the horror actors that are in this story and the progress of the plot, and it really is a unique and underappreciated story in horror. The Crate could have been one of those stories that went too far for its themes, but it sprinkles in the right amount to have for a short story. You do have these psychological elements that balances very well with the horrific elements, that one doesn't outweigh the other and doesn't feel that one is going too far to showcase these uncomfortable moments, to see these unlikable people and these people that you have to feel bad for and these people that you question for their motives. Everyone is completely fleshed out for their characters, that you do feel like you know these characters, and it makes you intrigued to wonder what's going to happen to all of them in the end. If there's anyone that loves a story where it keeps them guessing, then I gotta point people in the direction of The Crate, because this is what people are looking for. We need different horror movies and horror stories that would be in the same tone and atmosphere of The Crate. This is like the blueprint for horror right here. It's a great story that has a great ending, but like endings, we have to wrap up Creepshow with one more story. And I'm not gonna lie, it kind of bugs me. The story of their creeping up on you is a complete excuse for you to sit there and go, I can't wait to watch this person die. Normally, you're not supposed to say that about people, but when it comes to horror characters, that's like the free pass to wish demise onto someone. And my God, the man that is in this story is the epitome of a scumwad. I have to admit that the story of their creeping up on you is not my favorite story. I respect the hell out of it, but after watching The Crate and Something to Tide You Over, like, bugs just don't do it for me. And I just don't really vibe with this story, but I still respect the elements that it brings. I still will watch this story time and time again when I want to finish out the rest of the movie. And I have to give credit where credit's due. They really did make the most unlikable character in the entire movie. So that does go to show that the more unlikable someone is, the more it makes sense that you're going to see their demise. And this is a character that doesn't feel like he's a textbook cliched, absolute criminal, selfish, disgusting character. This is someone that it's like you're amazed, how bad does this character get? The character that you follow is named Upson Pratt, who is a very successful businessman that has no problem doing whatever it takes to get his business thriving, even if that means he caused the death of one of his rivals. He was so cruel and ruthless that he took over the business of his business rival that caused his business rival to unalive himself. And in that turn of events, Upson gets a phone call who he thinks is just someone else to call and complain to him, and he could care less. But now that he knows that it's the wife of the man that he caused the death, oh, that just delights him. Throughout the entire duration of the phone call, where this woman is saying how angry she is that this man caused the death of her husband, all he does in a reaction is lift his arms up to pose and mimics doing the play of a violin. It's like, damn, this man, like, it never ends. There's like a new level that he reaches for how disgusting and cruel he can be. It shows you how much he does not care about the lives of others. If it doesn't make him money, he doesn't care. If death does make him money, that's even better. This is such a disgusting villain that it almost rivals the character from Something to Tide You Over. But that's just my personal take on it. As much as I could go on about the story, I really can't. And I say that because this is the shortest story in the compilation of short stories. It really has a quick story to it where it's a man that's bad and he hates bugs, and bugs keep showing up the more bad things that he does. After that, that kind of gave away the ending of the story if I kept going. I will say this to those out there that haven't seen the movie, you're definitely going to be rooting for those bugs during this segment, I can tell you that much. And in a way, it's kind of like a great parallel. The increasing amount of cruelty he is, the more bugs show up. And knowing that's the very thing he hates, it's going to make it very satisfying knowing he can't escape from a tiny little bug that is getting into obtuse amounts into his apartment that he tries to keep as cleanly as possible. So in a way, it's kind of like a very nice karma story. It's a good way to wrap up Creepshow. But that's not the final wrap-up on Creepshow, because we gotta come back around to the beginning of how Creepshow started with that family. I can't tell you how it ends, but I can definitely tell you, you're gonna love Joe King. Just gotta say that. Whew! This was a long episode. Whew! I didn't expect I was gonna talk about every single story, but I feel like I had to for this episode. I really can't not talk about every story because there's something to appreciate about every story. I see now why Creepshow is known as one of the best horror films. It's a strong title and it upholds that title. You're given 5 amazing stories of horror that's delivered by 2 people that know what they're doing in that genre. That is the ultimate collaboration, and we don't get many great collaborations in horror these days, so knowing we have that, that's a wonderful addition to have to the horror genre. Without Creepshow, we wouldn't have the future of anthology films like Tales from the Dark Side, Tales from the Crypt. This essentially became the torch that led the way for anthology series, if you really look at it, because there's not many anthologies before the 80s, and if there were, they weren't really created the way that Creepshow was created. All I can say is if you're in the mood for some horror stories, get a thing of popcorn and watch this movie. Okay. Woo! Okay. Now is the time to find out what the next episode is going to be on the Halloween series. Now, everything in this container that I have, which you can't see, but I'm going to tell you, I am going to continue to add to it throughout the entire duration of October. So, I really don't know what's going to be in store, because it's going to be changing by the next episode. Now is the time to find out what the next episode is going to be. Alrighty. I need one of those things that makes this lotto system a little bit easier. The pieces of paper are kind of hard to juggle sometimes. Okay, I got one. No, I got 2. No, I got one. It's just a long one. Oh my. Oh my goodness. Yes. Oh, yes. Just, yes. The next episode on The Screen Queen is going to be Courage the Cowardly Dog. Oh, this is gonna be so much fun. I'm so hyped for that. That's just amazing. That's kind of a funny pattern considering we just talked about a horror movie that you have fun with. Now we're gonna be talking about a horror show that people have fun with. This is gonna be fun. Alrighty. Well, that sums up the first episode for the Halloween series on The Screen Queen. My name is Samantha Parrish, and thank you so much for tuning into the show. You all take care now, and I will be back with another spooky episode. Bye-bye!